Go ahead and begin. Hello, everyone. My name is Andy Mouse, and I'm the Director and CEO of Plains Art Museum in Fargo. Welcome to a series of brief conversations we are hosting intended to provide some hope, inspiration, and guidance during the time of this crisis. We're hosting these conversations as a part of the museum's Giving Tuesday efforts, which is a global day of giving and generosity. And I don't know about you, but I could use a little goodness right now, so I'm hoping that this conversation series will provide a little bit of that for not only for us, but for you, as we're all in this together. So we'll start each conversation with a brief quote, and these conversations will be short, and we'll just kind of see where they go. This one will be one of the most famous quotes on generosity by none other than Sir Winston Churchill. "We make a living by what we make, and we make a life by what we give." And so with that, we will go ahead and begin. We are joined today by none other than Netha Cloeter, who's the Plains Art Museum Director of Education and Social Engagement. Netha, before we begin, please tell us a little bit about yourself, both personally and professionally.
Yeah, thanks, Andy. As Andy said, I'm Director of Education and Social Engagement at Plains Art Museum. So all of the educational programs, which are really wide-reaching that we offer through the museum, are in our education department. And I work on a lot of those. On a personal level, I'm originally from Wisconsin. I received degrees from Valparaiso University and an MA degree from the University of Oklahoma in art history. And I'm a mom. I have two kids. One is 2 and one is 8 months.
2 and 8 months. It feels like they should be older than that by now. I'm sure you feel the same.
Yeah. One is 3, but he's still
okay. So what do you, the next question is really simple. What do you consider your areas of expertise?
Well, I'm an art historian by training, but also have a background in art education. So before receiving my master's degree, I was a high school art and English teacher in South Dakota for several years. So I'm really interested in art education, but for all audiences, so pre-K through adults. But also as a museum educator, you really do get to weave a lot of art history into the work that you do. And so I still get to maintain that degree and use that degree, which I think is really exciting. And then I've also done curatorial work in a few different positions I have had throughout the years. So contemporary art is kind of my area of interest and focus, and global indigenous art would be kind of the direction that my thesis took when I was in grad school.
Okay, interesting. So this next one is really specific about our current circumstance, but I find it really interesting. So I don't know, let me know what you think, but people tend to create more during times of crisis. And I think we see this, speaking of art history, you would look at artistic responses to warfare, for example, and the crisis and the even not just for the soldiers, but for countries who are at war, and what that does to economies and what that does to supply chains and what that does to daily life, educational systems, and so forth. For example, when our current condition became more well known, here's a very personal example. My younger son started drawing more, and so he was obviously dealing with the reality of a world that was much, I would say, scarier than he thought it was before. And it was immediate because he's always been good at drawing, but he's not a frequent drawer. And I saw that he was really picking that up. And so it seems like a very direct connection. But what do you think the value is of creativity during a time of crisis? And why do you think that is something that happens within humanity?
Yeah, well, as you said at the beginning there, great art has been made in times of adversity throughout history. Um, and I think it's interesting in this moment because in my lifetime, there have been some pretty great times of adversity. As someone born in the early 80s, you know, around the time I was graduating high school, 9/11 happened. And I remember artistic responses to those things, but never really connected them to like Hemingway's Farewell to Arms and these great works of art and literature that are really grounded in like a war or a global event like what we're going through now. And I'm starting to see that big picture, like how our ancestors turned to the process of creating to get them through some really difficult times. I think my eyes are just more open to that and why they would have turned to art. And as to why, I mean, those of us that work in the arts know this and say this all the time, but I think right now is a real testament to the power of creating and the power of art. Art can inspire us and transform us and guide us through these times and even protect us. Our anxiety levels are lowered, and this has been proven on a neurological level when we're engaged in creating something.
Mm.
And then on a personal note too, the times that I've turned to just making something, and as a mom of young kids, I'm talking like 2 minutes here and there where I'll stop and I'll do like a blind contour drawing or something small. Um, I can say like shifting my mind from a response mode to creating creates a huge difference in my own, you know, ability to see clearly and think clearly. So instead of reacting to the news or reacting to, you know, even on a work level, all of our jobs are reacting right now to what's happening.
Right.
Taking time to create in that moment, and that's a complete pivot that really creates a totally different response inside of on a physiological level inside of our bodies.
Yeah, that's interesting. I was just thinking about this yesterday, actually. We're working on a big puzzle, like I think a lot of people are. And it's a big 1,000-piece puzzle of Bryce Canyon. So all the pieces are brown. They're all shades of brown and tan. And um, it's probably the most difficult puzzle that I've ever tried to work on. And my wife came up to me yesterday and she goes, you know, you look like you had a long day at work. You probably shouldn't be working on that puzzle. And I was like, no, this is what I need to do right now because it's
Mhm.
like, and I started to think about what it was like when I was creating a lot of art and how you would just get lost for a while in
Mhm.
looking at shapes and patterns and creating something um, that required a lot of concentration, but at the same time was mindless. And it was sort of like this. Um, Seems paradoxical, but it makes sense if you're creating that you can just sort of lose yourself in it. And there must be, as you said, some sort of neurological response that our bodies have when we're in that mode and we're no longer responding to the world in our normal way. That's really interesting to me that there would be studies that would back that up because it's something that I think we all know working in the arts, and we just sort of have
Yeah.
this intuitive sense. Um, so you sort of responded to this already, but what advice do you have for people who have never made anything, or maybe I mean I suppose everyone has made something, but maybe not with intentionality, maybe not with the kind of um, mindfulness, or maybe not in an artful way. Um, what do you think? Um, I would say now that we have time, what would you say to encourage people to make during this time?
Well, what we always say at the museum, because we're a community art center too, is that, you know, your everyday life can be artistic and can be creatively led. So I really have a really expansive understanding of what it means to make and create and what art is.
Hmm.
We also at Plains Art Museum, we have a garden that's part of our collection, the Pollinator Garden at Plains Art Museum by artist Chris Baumler. That is a work of art, and we see it as a living, breathing object. That's a public art project. So very expansive definition of art. And on that note, in this particular trying moment, I would say start really simple and focus on the process, not on the product right now. Um, if you're someone that's, never made a painting before, the first time that you make it right now, like there's no reason to make something that's you're going to try to exhibit in a museum someday, right? Like we're turning to art for different reasons. And so just embrace that it's about the process and not the end product, and letting go of your expectations of what that end product might be right now so that you can learn the process.
I love.
And then the last thing that I would say right now, because it comes from a personal like testimony, is that notice how you feel while you're making. And I think we know a lot right now that mindfulness is important, and meditation, even on a public health standpoint, like free meditation apps are being shared with healthcare workers who are really going through it and are on the front line. So trying to be mindful and just notice yourself and what's happening inside of you while you're creating something is one way to be mindful, and to
Mm.
reaffirm like what that means and what the process of creating can do for you.
So that's really interesting. I think it can be difficult, and you mentioned at the beginning of this that you're a parent. I'm also a parent, right? Like parents right now, we're dealing with, if we're lucky, we still are able to work, and if we're extraordinarily lucky, we're able to be working from home right now. But at the same time, that also creates some complexity, right? Where we have our children, and our children are now at-home learners, which means that we are facilitating that learning along with trying to keep up with work. It's a lot, and it's difficult to be mindful in that environment. I'm sure you've experienced this. I've certainly experienced this. uh, it's really challenging to be a parent right now during this crisis, and especially in thinking about children and that learning experience, and how creativity can help us personally as parents, but also can help create bonds between families. Do you have any recommended resources for our audience that could, who are maybe parents who have kids at home, who would want to practice creativity at home?
Yeah, and as a parent, I'll say sometimes the only making I'm doing during the day is alongside my toddler, right? So
Hmm.
you can work it into the act of parenting. You can parent in creative ways and be mindful too as you're going through that process. Um, so we're sharing several different resources each week that are developed in conjunction with our Tuesdays for Toddlers program. So Sarah Watson Curry is also a parent of a young child, a toddler. So all of the things we're sharing have been toddler tested and toddler approved. And they use very simple materials. And that idea, I mean, right now there's just an explosion of ideas to the point that it's hard to filter through all these different ideas. But we're focusing on very, very simple materials. Like this week, it was tinfoil. And so taking that simple material and thinking, what can we do with this thing that we have in our house right now? And toddlers really thrive with that transformative power of a material. And I think with all of these, they're really sensory friendly and involve sensory exploration. And we see them as not just for toddlers too, like adults can get a lot out of them and older kids could too.
Hmm.
Um, and we're sharing other resources through our Visit Us Virtually page that are inspired by the collection, are geared towards all audiences. Um, and then if someone's really interested in getting their kids engaged right now for a longer period of time, which is really valuable, like stay concentrated on something for 45 minutes, we are doing virtual classes. So we've got some adult ones up right now, and then we're slowly offering a few youth ones. And the powerful thing about a virtual class right now is that it does offer a sense of community. So we talked earlier about what happens when you're just creating instead of responding. Well, what we're noticing in our little virtual classrooms is everyone's engaged in that, but you're still all together. And that's the closest replica we can create right now to like an in-person studio class experience. Yeah, so lots of resources for parents. Use what you have. Use your time and the materials that you have.
My kids took one of those virtual classes making trading cards. They were super engaged. They supplemented they were like, can I use my mark? My younger son got it some like new, gosh, what are they called? They're like these fine tip markers that you can use. And he was really excited to try them out on those. So yeah, just like supplementing with stuff we had around the house, it was really fun. They were engaged and they were part of a group again. And I think especially with kids right now, well, maybe not especially, but certainly with kids, they're missing their classroom. They're having these virtual experiences online, but in a more informal, sort of personal way. Schools are also about socializing, and so making something together can be a part of that experience for our kids. Anything else before we close, Nita, that you wanted to mention?
Um, no, I think we covered a lot of different topics. With the classes, the only thing I'll add is that we have really talented teaching artists at Plains Art Museum, and our classes are being led by them, and a lot of talented folks that are sharing their areas of expertise with our audiences. Hayden, one of our teaching artists, has Hayden's Art Party on the Facebook page every day, and Hayden's really entertaining, great instructor. Chelsea Steffes taught the class that you alluded to, and Amanda Height, our print studio manager, is doing adult classes too. So it's also a chance to support local artists and to work with some practicing artists too.
That's great. So good. Well, thank you for joining us, Nita. I'm going to close with a little bit of my thoughts. Um, Art is the creativity, wellness, inspiration, and hope that I think we all need right now. So thank you for being a part of this brief conversation today. Please consider a gift to Plains Art Museum's Let's Get Through This Together campaign to ensure that we can continue to thrive in the future. Go to plainsart.org/support to give a gift of any amount, and that will make you a part of the Plains Art Museum support community. There's a link in the comment section, and support really helps us to thrive in this virtual environment that we find ourselves in today, and will ensure that we can sustain our operations when we're able to open up in person again in the future. So with that, we'll close. Thank you, Nita. Thank you all for joining us, and there'll be more conversation to come.